we love the unique names, love their dynamic, and I loved how it was kind of like that found family trope. I don't know about this guy. What the heck am I reading? Tamlin, like... Hey guys, it's Hannah and welcome back to my channel. So today's video is going to be another book review, and the minute I started reading this series, I knew that I was going to have to do a review on this. What is this series, you might ask? It's kind of already in the title, but it is the A Court of Thorns and Roses series by Sarah J. Maas, whom I love. She is an amazing author. So this series includes, I'm pretty sure, this is where I get a little bit confused because I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be 3 original books and then some spin-offs that kind of add to it. But the plot was never really finished within the first 3 books, but we're going to get into that a little later. But what I'm going to be talking about is all 5 that have currently been written, which is in order: A Court of Thorns and Roses, A Court of Mist and Fury, A Court of Wings and Ruin, A Court of Frost and Starlight, and A Court of Silver Flames. These are the first 3. And then these 2 are kind of spin-offs in a way, but again, we'll get to that in a minute. So this is technically considered an adult series versus her YA series, which is Throne of Glass. And then her other book in the Crescent City series is also adult. Reading between these 2, reading Throne of Glass and then reading this and Crescent series, I can see how there is a bit of a difference with either the language or kind of what happens maybe romantically. So I've read a bunch of stuff by Sarah J. Maas before. Again, I've read Throne of Glass and I've read the Crescent City series, which is only 1 book as of right now because the next book comes out in January. Yay, expect a review on that. And then I read this book. So I kind of maybe read them a little out of order because Crescent City is the newest, but also this last book is pretty new. And for all y'all who get bothered by the fact that there is 4 paperback and 1 hardcover, I am sincerely sorry. So unlike how I did my review on the Twilight series, where I just did it by book, which also took a pretty long time, I'm just going to be organizing it into categories such as like characters, romance, plot, world building, etc. because it is such a long series and there's so much to talk about that I feel like going book by book will just take way too much time. So I will have the timestamps in the description box down below if you want to skip around. There will be some non-spoiler sections, but be prepared. There will be a whole lot of spoilers. And if you are coming into this video and you've only read like a couple of the books, you need to be coming in aware that I will be spoiling like all of the books. So if you haven't read all of them, maybe read all of them and then come back. Or I mean, if you don't care, feel free to stick around. But before we get started into the video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. So before we get into actually talking about the books, I wanted to mention something, and that is pronunciation. So Sarah J. Maas's names in her books are always very unique, which I love. We love the unique names, except it makes them very hard to pronounce. So I just wanted to say in this video that bear with me if I pronounce it not the way it's supposed to, because obviously when we're all reading in our head, we pronounce things a little differently than they're actually supposed to be pronounced. Actually, if you didn't know, Sarah J. Maas has pronunciation guides on her website for Throne of Glass and A Court of Thorns and Roses. So go check those out if you're not sure, because I literally just found out about this. So now we're going to get into the non-spoiler section of this video, where I'm going to be giving a little rundown of what the first book is about in case you are watching and you just haven't read it and are wondering if you should read it or not. So the first book is called A Court of Thorns and Roses, and it looks like this. It's actually gone through a bit of a cover change. So these are like the newer covers that I have versus the old ones that have actually a girl on it, which is supposed to be Feyre. And so basically Feyre is 19 years old. On the back of the book, it calls her a huntress, but basically she's hunting because she needs to provide for her family and feed them. So she hunts for food and then also sells their pelts to get money because her family is poor. They used to be rich, but then something happened where her dad, who is like the prince of merchants, as he is called, lost all their money, and now they just live in this rundown cottage. She has 2 sisters and her father, and then you also learn that her mom passed away. She one day goes into these woods, and these woods near her home are against this wall. It's just called the Wall, and it separates the mortal lands from the Fey lands in Prithian, which is kind of like the whole continent. But the mortal lands are very small compared to the Fey lands, and the humans don't like the Fey. They're scared of them, and the Fey just don't have any interest in the humans, so they kind of just stay away from each other. And also because of the wall that went up because of a war that happened. So basically that's kind of the land they live in. and she goes in there and hunts, and one day she ends up killing this fairy who looks like a wolf. Then she obviously, you know, brings back the pelt and sells it and everything, but then this magical fae named Tamlin comes and takes her, and you find out why, because she killed that fairy. And now she has to go into the magical fae lands, and she's required to stay there because of this like rule that you also learn about in here. So now she is in the fae lands, and she's with this guy Tamlin, and he's kind of, I would describe him more like brutish. Like he just kind of like came into the house and was like,
"Who killed him? You."
And like took her from her sisters. But now she's kind of with him, and she's like, well, maybe he's not terrible all the time. So here's where kind of the romance comes into this. But then there's also other things at play. There's things happening in Prythian where it's kind of questionable, and all these creatures, and something is just amiss as you are reading it. Basically, she gets sucked into this fae world and kind of is a hero in the story. Love this series. Before we get into spoilers, I'll give a little more information. This series definitely has a ton of romance in it. It's like half romance, half plot. So if you're not really big on romance, you could give it a try and decide for yourself if the plot is sufficient enough for you to want to keep reading and just get past the romance, or if not, maybe this isn't the series for you if you are like very much so plot driven. But if you love romance and you like, you know, plots and twists and turns that you will not expect, then I would definitely suggest this series. And if you are just starting this series, I know some people read the first book and are kind of like, what the heck am I reading? Like, I know I was like, Sarah J Maas, I've read your other books. It's not a bad book, but I was kind of like waiting for something more out of it. But if you're watching this and you're going to plan to read this or are reading this right now, I promise you, hold on and keep reading the series, because the second book gets good. So now we're going to get into the spoilers, and again, I'm going to break it up by section, and it's going to be down in the description box. So first thing first, I'm actually just going to talk about Sarah J Maas and her writing style, because Sarah J Maas, I love how descriptive she writes. Like, she paints a very vivid picture, and for me, I've said this in my Twilight series review, but like the big words, the descriptive words, like that's where I'm like sucked into the story. Like, oh my gosh, it's just so satisfying for me. And I also like, you know, when she's like describing these characters and building these worlds, she describes them enough where you can get an image, but there's also wiggle room where you can imagine kind of what you want. So I feel like she does a really good job of balancing, like making sure you know what she's talking about and then leaving room for your imagination and your own creativity within the story. So I think that's really good, and you can tell that she just puts so much effort into her writing, because literally I read the acknowledgments in A Court of Silver Flames, which is the newest one, the hardcover that came out earlier this year. And in her acknowledgments, she is like acknowledging people who taught her like how to fight and combat and like some meditation and going on hikes, because in the story there's like some, you know, training and hiking, and like that amount of effort, like thank you, Sarah J Maas, for putting that much effort into your writing, that she literally went and did this stuff herself so she could write such a descriptive like story that included all this. To say the least, you can tell that Sarah J Maas loves what she does. I do love her as an author, and I think like if you do look at people's writing maybe from an author perspective, that you would really like what she has to offer in her books. So that is her writing, but now I'm going to get into her characters. So the main character is Feyre, obviously. Okay, I think I've gotten through and said her name correctly a couple times now, so that's good. I love that she creates such good character arcs within these stories. So Feyre obviously starts out where she is responsible for feeding her family. Her sisters aren't doing anything because they grew up differently under their mom, and they were kind of bred, I guess, to be these like ladies who were just going to be the perfect wives to these rich men. But Feyre was not brought up like that. So obviously she's hunting. She feels obligated to take care of her family also because of the promise that she made to her mom when her mom was on her deathbed. She's trying to get through it, but she really just wants that quiet, like easy life where she doesn't have to feel like the stress of doing all this and have all this pressure on her. But then when she is taken by Tamlin and she's kind of living with him, she's living this easy life, but then, you know, after she saves him from like Amarantha and all the three trials under the mountain and comes back and is going to get married to Tamlin, then she's kind of like, I don't really like this quiet life where I don't get to do anything. So I love how along the way she finds out that it's not that she wanted a quiet life. And it's not that she wanted this really fast life with all this pressure. It's that she wanted a choice between the two. Like, she wanted to be able to have a choice on whether or not she wanted to do this one thing, or if she just wanted to settle down, or if she wanted to go out and wanted to go out without someone watching her. Like, I love that, like, she's beginning to realize as a character exactly what she wants, and that Rhysand can give that to her versus Tamlin. So, moving on, let's talk about Tamlin. I didn't really like him from the beginning. Going into it, I had actually kind of watched a little bit of a video where this girl was like ranking book couples, and one of her lowest ranks was literally just called Tamlin. So I saw that and I was like, okay, is he not supposed to be a good person? But when I was reading it, I was just like, I don't know about this guy. He didn't really have that many layers to him. He was just kind of like this quiet, like, male in the Spring Court. I mean, he was like the High Lord, but he didn't really have that much going on, or like all this guilt. He was just kind of living his life in his big house, and I mean, I don't know. I just didn't really think there was that much to him, and therefore that's also why I didn't like the romance between Tamlin and Feyre, which I know was the point, but we'll talk about that in the romance section. I don't know. I wasn't a big fan of him, and then of course when Feyre left, he was like, she's my property kind of thing, and I think that's terrible, which again I know is the point, but like I did not like the way he thought, and then he was just throwing massive temper tantrums when she wanted to actually like help him like save and, you know, rebuild the world after Amarantha and Under the Mountain and everything. So Tamlin in general just did not like him, and also just he wasn't layered enough for me. He didn't have enough going on. But on the other side of things, there's Rhysand, and he was one of my favorite characters in the book. I liked how he was funny because he would just say like witty remarks back to Feyre and kind of get her like fired up, which was also funny because I loved their dynamic between each other, and I literally thought they were perfect for each other as mates. I just loved his personality, and I thought that he was a really well-written character because he was layered. Like, he had guilt from Under the Mountain with what he did, but he also did it, you know, to save his court and his found family and friends. And you find out that, and like, you think he's a bad person within the first book, but you know, then you kind of peel back those layers and you find out why he had to kind of wear that mask of being this evil lord of the night and everything. And I like how Feyre is also kind of the one that begins to like unveil all those layers of him, so you can find out like who he truly is, and I just love it. And sometimes I think it's very attractive when the male in the story sometimes just has a moment where he breaks down. So I like that eventually Rhysand kind of had those walls down, and then there was like that night where he was like having a nightmare and stuff, and he was just like broken and upset, and I just loved that Feyre was able to kind of help him through that and through his guilt, and that he was able to break down, because I actually think that's attractive when the males in the story can do that. I don't know about you guys. And then Rhysand's court, which comes in within A Court of Mist and Fury, and then even more so in the next books following, but that's where they're introduced in the second book. So that would be like Cassian, Azriel, Mor, all of them, which by the way, those aren't on the pronunciation guide, so if I'm pronouncing them differently, I'm so sorry, but that's how I pronounce them. His court was also just really funny. I love their dynamic, and I loved how it was kind of like that found family trope where, you know, all of their families had been either rude to them or thrown them out or taken away or killed, or something had happened with the rest of their family, yet they found happiness with each other. So I just liked that character dynamic, and I loved how all of them did have backstories that kind of made them who they are. Like, they just weren't these like insufficient side characters that like didn't play a role. Like, they actually had their own stories that made them who they were. Like, there were reasons behind how they acted, but also they all had this like really funny banter about them. But I liked how it still felt like they were individual in their own way. Like, all of them were funny, you know, Rhysand and Cassian and Mor, and then even Azriel, the Shadow Singer, in his own way. Okay, apparently this keeps happening to me literally every video, but my phone keeps cutting out. So now I'm using my sister's phone, so I'm sorry if something about the lighting or the angle of the camera changed. Anyways, let's get back to what I was saying. Rhysand's court, I loved how they were humorous and funny in their own way, yet they were all funny, I guess. And then let's talk about Nesta and Elaine, which is Feyre's sisters. I don't really know how to pronounce her last name. Is it like Archeon? The Archeon sisters? I don't know. I think I probably just skipped over it in my head and was like, the Archeon. So Nesta and Elaine, I didn't really like Nesta. really much at all until A Court of Silver Flames, but it's also just because I didn't understand her, which is why I think A Court of Silver Flames was so necessary for us to understand that Nesta was just guilty and just feeling like she wasn't deserving of love, and she just was like, it's easier to block people out than feel all of these feelings, and like everyone I love just keeps getting taken away from me, so I'm not going to open myself up anymore. So I like that A Court of Silver Flames really let us get to know Nesta a little more, because I think I'm probably not the only person who really did not like Nesta just because we didn't understand her. Elaine, we don't really get to see a whole lot of stuff from her point of view, actually nothing from her point of view, though you can tell that she is this quiet girl who really just does not do anything for herself and kind of is reliant on other people. And you can see how after she went into the cauldron and became a maid fae, that she really tried to, you know, pick up the pieces for herself, but also her sisters were still treating her like she was something that was frail and innocent. Again, in A Court of Silver Flames, Elaine also, you know, was feeling upset from being cauldron maid and, you know, having her life taken away from her and her mortal fiance who she was supposed to get married to, which I don't really think she even loved anyways, but she was really attached to him. And I just think, honestly, I think that Sarah J Maas has more stuff in the future and that there's a good chance that we're going to get a book on Elaine. There's a bunch of things that have not been wrapped up nicely with a bow, and a lot of those include Elaine and some of her love life, especially the fact that she's mated to Lucien, or Lucien, whatever, yet she seems to have a thing for the Shadow Singer, or Azrael, and he might have it too, because I mean, he literally gave her Truth Teller. He never gives it to anyone. Like, is he getting over more? Question mark. Speaking of which, now we're going to go into probably one of the longest sections. Speaking of which, now we are probably going to get into one of the longest sections of this video, which is romance. So as I said, romance was literally like half of this series because there's so much going on, which is what I love about Sarah J Maas, is that she creates multiple romances that you're rooting for and not just like the main singular one. There obviously is a main singular one, but you know, she creates lots to go for. So first things first, let's talk about Feyre and Tamlin. So that really only happens here and then maybe like into this a little bit but by the time you reach the third book, it's really not a big thing then because you know who Feyre loves. But Feyre and Tamlin, let's talk about romance. There was none. Honestly, I did not think this was a romance. This was 100% just like a lust, because Feyre at the time was just looking for anyone that she could like talk to or be with because she'd just been taken from her family. You know, she wanted that sense of like security and safe, and Tamlin could give that to her and provide it for her, and he kind of needed to fall in love with someone and have a human fall in love with him because of the whole like Blythe thing that he lied about, but the curse with Amarantha, and he needed a human to fall in love with him. At the time, I think they both just needed things and each other could do that, but I definitely don't think that they were in love. So them together, absolutely not. Even after book one, I wasn't like, yay, Feyre and Tamlin. Like after book one, I was like, Sarah J Maas, I have read the Throne of Glass series. I have read the first book in your new Crescent City series. This was not a romance. Like, I knew more had to be coming, so I was still planning to read the rest of the books. I know now that she did this on purpose, because if she had created, you know, this male that we actually liked and this romance that we actually liked, then if she was hanging out with Rhysand and now she got attached to him, she probably didn't want us to get attached to Tamlin, because then it would actually be very heartbreaking if she ended up with someone else who we didn't like as much. So that's probably why Tamlin's character just was not my favorite, and that their romance just was not a romance, especially when he was taken by Amarantha and Feyre was literally going to save him, and then he was like sitting there, and this was when like Rhysand was talking to her, and he was like, did you ever think that maybe he's not saying something, like he's not under a curse, did you ever think that maybe he's not saying something, that way Amarantha doesn't know which kind of torture hurts him the most? And at the time I didn't really think much of it. I was like, okay, I guess that like makes sense, but then I'm like looking back on it, I was like, so he wasn't saying something to save Feyre because he didn't want Amarantha to know what hurt him. He wasn't willing to risk his own pain to save the woman he loved. And then the one time that he actually went to her, he didn't talk to her, he didn't reassure her, he didn't say I love you. No, they just kind of like made out in a closet. Again, at first I was just kind of like, well, there hasn't been any romantic moments in a while, so it's fine. But like, again, like you kind of look back on it once you've read more about like Rhysand and Feyre and how like pure their relationship is, and then you're like, Tamlin, like what Tamlin who? Like, you know, it was not a romance. But you know what was a romance? Feyre and Rhysand. They were literally perfect for each other. So in the first book, when they were together, I always found it kind of entertaining. Though I didn't like Rhysand at first. I was kind of like, I mean, you're just probably kind of almost like a villain of the story. Amarantha was the villain, but at the same time, he was just kind of like that funny, like evil henchman side character is kind of how I saw him. Then they were kind of hanging out together, and then by the end of the story, when he was the one who actually went in to save Feyre and was the one who was kind of like asking the people to save her with the High Lords and their magic, you know, then I was kind of like, okay, maybe he's not that bad of a person because he was the one who literally ran in, not Tamlin. Then, you know, that moment they had at the end of the book where he kind of like felt something and then like disappeared, you know, I was kind of like, what was that? But then it's addressed later on, because then I found myself in book 2 constantly getting excited for when Feyre would have to have her bargain with Rhysand and go there for a week every month. That's what I was looking forward to in this book. I knew then, I was so hopeful that then that it would mean that Feyre and Rhysand were gonna get together, because I was a little afraid that Sarah J. Maas was gonna have Tamlin be this terrible person. Then she was gonna go and we were gonna get attached to Rhysand, but then she was gonna make Feyre go back to Tamlin anyways, and it turns out that he wasn't like this brutish, brooding male. But I was really happy when it turns out that Feyre got to stay with Rhysand, but I was a little afraid. But at the same time, to me, Sarah J. Maas is kind of known for making you think that they're supposed to end up with one person when they really don't. Throne of Glass. So I was really happy about this, and it was so obvious that they were meant for each other because they both... Okay, no, let me explain this first. My definition of a romance in a book is when two people, they have to share some sort of like similar feelings or shared experiences, or they have to have layers, they have to open up to each other, like they have to have something in common other than just finding the other person attractive, you know, which is literally what Feyre and Tamlin was. There was no layers to Tamlin. There was layers to Feyre, but there wasn't anything that they really had in common. So with them, Rhysand was feeling guilt and having nightmares from under the mountain. So was Feyre, and they were both kind of struggling with stuff, and like they had shared things and they were sharing moments. And I know that like Rhysand already knew that she was her mate, but he was also being like respectful, and he was allowing her, hello piece of hair, he was allowing for her to have that choice to, you know, do stuff. He was always like, well, it's your choice, like I'm not gonna stop you. I mean, even if he wanted to be protective of her, he didn't stop her from going out and doing things that she wanted to do and helping to save the world and stop Hybern and his armies and all of that. And then like the moment where I found out they were mates, I was like, yes! I was like, they are so meant for each other. I was so happy because I like did not want her to go back to Tamlin. And literally they're probably like my favorite couple in this series, because I just think that they were so good for each other. I think honestly sometimes it is kind of attractive when the males are like really protective of them. So like when they were kind of like mated then and he was being like really protective of her, like ever since after that, sometimes it would get a little bit like, you know, mother hen as Feyre would say, but I always thought it was like really cute how much he cared for her. So I love that. And then another mated couple, let's talk about Nesta and Cassian, which you read about in A Court of Silver Flames, but it actually, I believe, starts honestly within the second book when he's trying to like crawl towards her when his wings are torn up when she goes into the cauldron. And called it. Did anyone else call this? I knew it. The moment that happened, and when they were at the sister's house to kind of talk to the mortal queens, and Cassian was saying that he would like protect her and not let anyone harm her or Elaine, I was like, okay. I was like, there's something happening here between the two of them, or at least with Cassian, and I knew it. So then again, Sarah J. Maas created another couple where they had shared feelings that they both just needed to like talk to each other about. So like they were both feeling like they weren't deserving of things because Nesta had done things in her life that she was guilty about, and Cassian was kind of considered like a bastard born Illyrian, but then he came into power and Nesta gained power from the cauldron. So they kind of had similarities there. I'm doing a whole lot of hand motions. You like that? then again, I just think that, you know, Sarah J. Maas created just a couple that, like, you know, you wanted to root for and you wanted them to get together from the beginning. Though Nesta was so stubborn, sometimes it got on my nerves. I was like, Cassian cares about you so much, it's so obvious, and you're just like not even acknowledging the fact that you might like him back. But finally it happened, and then when they found out they were mates, I was so happy. I wanted them to be mates too, because then it's like a forever relationship, you know. The thing though, Cassian and Nesta, I found myself having to skip through pages of detailed scenes a little bit more than with Feyre and Rhysand, just as a thing. It's considered adult, so there's definitely some pages where I was like, you know, I started reading it and I was like, oh, that's a little too detailed. I kind of get the gist. I don't need to read all of that. And then the last thing I want to discuss, which also I feel like is something that was left open-ended, was Elain, Lucien, however you pronounce his name, and Azriel. There is some sort of love triangle going on here that I feel like just has not been tied up, which is why I think there will probably be another book, because it isn't like Sarah J. Maas to leave all these things open-ended. Like with the Throne of Glass series, I mean, it was like 8 books long, but by the time it finished, you had all the romances that were there, and you had all the plot was finished. Like there's still a ton of stuff with both plot and romance that I feel like just is still happening in this world and in this series. So that's why I don't think that it is over, though she is really busy writing some other stuff, but I feel like we're probably going to see more. So obviously Elain and Lucien are mates, and you found that in book 2, and I was like, okay, this makes things really interesting. So I thought there was going to be more there, but Elain was like literally just ignoring Lucien the whole time, and I kind of felt bad because I always thought him to be a good person, you know. He happened to be friends with Tamlin, so then maybe he kind of got a bad rap from the Night Court. So I kind of felt bad about that, and you know, he saw Tamlin as someone who was just struggling, so he was there for Tamlin, and he was like a good person. But Elain was kind of in her own space. She really did not like being Fae, so that kind of got in the way of things and with her being with him. But then her and Azriel, it seemed like Azriel, you know, he was really attracted to Mor for like the longest time, and you eventually obviously found out why, because Mor is more attracted to females versus males, and just used Cassian as like this barrier between her and Azriel. But then Azriel, it seemed like, you know, kind of had like a thing for Elain. He was one of the only people who could kind of make her get out of the house or like do things and go garden. I don't know, he literally gave her his sword, like Truth Teller. Like Shadow Singer and Truth Teller go together, like when they're like fighting with all these shadows, and like he gave it to her to fight, even though she literally did not know how to use it. And you know, Elain seems to blush when he's around, and then I don't know, but like nothing was ever addressed between them either, so that's why I think there's going to be another book. But I'm kind of eager to see. I don't know, part of me really wants Elain and Azriel to get together, but also Elain and Lucien are like mates, so I really don't know who to go for, because I also really want Azriel to like have that love story, because I know he's not gonna end up with Mor, because we already know why. She's just not attracted to males. But then like Elain is mated to Lucien, so who's poor Azriel gonna end up with, you know? Or like I don't know if it's possible to like break a mating bond. Like I don't know where she would go with that, because now I feel attached to Azriel, and I think it would be kind of funny if all 3 sisters were with all 3 males in the Night Court, but I really don't know. So that was the romance section, and now we're going to move on to plot, and these next couple ones will probably be a little bit shorter, because romance was where I like really needed to rant just about how perfect like I feel like these couples like went together. I mean, obviously they weren't perfect, but like you could tell that they were meant for each other, and that's what's important. You could tell that they had connections. Anyways, this is not about romance anymore. This is about plot. So I thought that the plot definitely kept me attached. There's some books where it's like if the romance is lacking, then the plot needs to be really good. And I've read, you know, a series or two where the romance and the plot just didn't do it for me. But this series definitely kept me in it with both plot and romance. Sarah J. Maas, she leaves all these Easter eggs, all this stuff that you think literally doesn't matter until it does. I'm trying to think. So I felt like the first book was definitely just a setup for like literally every aspect of the story, and the second book was really where things began happening, because the first book, she establishes all the characters, or at least what they're supposed to seem like and how they act. She establishes the fact that Amarantha comes from Hybern, and that Hybern's always had kind of tensions. She establishes that the mortal realm and the Fae realm kind of don't really go together. The humans fear the Fae, and the Fae just don't like the humans. And then, you know, she also just keeps us into it with the whole thing with the trials and how everyone's under the mountain, which is kind of a cool thing. But I feel like the real conflict really started in the second book, when you find out that Hybern actually wants to start a war and take over the mortal part of Prithian using the cauldron. So that's where things really get into it, which is why I'm also like, hold on to book 2, because this is where things really start happening and where you really start getting into the story. So I don't know, I just love it. I feel like this book was like, I was so good. And like the war with Hybern, I mean, there's such vivid pictures when they're fighting, and I think, you know, it was really cool in the plot when Feyre actually had the powers of all of the High Lords, because she had a drop of each to save her as Fae. I thought that was like genius. In the first book, when they kept talking about Heart of Stone, and that's how she didn't like have to kill Tamlin, like that was like I just love it. Like things seem so inconsequential, and then she brings them back up, and I'm literally amazed. Like I'm trying to think of other stuff. Nesta had powers from the cauldron, like that was something that I didn't really expect. And then okay, I'm sorry, when Rhys died, I could not put the book down. My heart felt like it was breaking in half. It's funny, my family was like, we had just gotten to this beach condo when I was reading it, and then my family, like, they were kind of like, okay, we have to unpack, and I was literally just like sitting there reading. I was literally not helping to unpack whatsoever, because I was just so attached. I was literally felt like I was like shaking, like I was stressed and I was about to cry. But I liked how they were able to save him, because I think I probably would have cried if she had done that to me, because I absolutely hate it when authors kill off main characters, because it is literally not necessary, and it literally just breaks my heart because I get so attached to them, especially like good series like this. So in general, that's what I wanted to address with the plot. I felt like it was very fast paced. There was always something new that was happening that you did not expect, and again, she just hides things that I really don't realize are there until they actually are, and it just keeps me on the edge of my seat. So I just think she does a great job with that. Obviously I love like her romance, and that's where I really can rant, but the plot was, I mean, it still kept me really into it. So then this video is definitely getting really long, but I also just wanted to address world building, because that is another thing that Sarah J. Maas does a really good job of doing, because she really establishes, especially in the first book, as I said, using this first book as a way to just establish everything. She really makes sure we know like kind of how the land is. In the book, there's maps in all of them. This one's not one of the most detailed ones. They get more detailed as you keep reading, because you find out about more people and more lands and more history and stuff like that. But you know, she establishes the relationship between the Fae and the mortals, and just how the land is made, and how there's like 7 courts, and the relationships between the courts and under the mountain. And she just is really descriptive also when describing the different sceneries and settings and locations and all of that stuff. So I just think like it was very easy to follow, and nothing really left me confused, I guess. So that was just like a quick little thing on world building. And then now I'm going to say a couple things that maybe I didn't like as much, which I'm hoping this section won't be too long, because I loved like most of this book. But I'm going to address something that had me a little confused, which was the fact that the first 3 books obviously followed Feyre, and it was all from her point of view, except for there were a couple moments where it was from Rhysand's point of view, but that was just to establish something that happened in the plot, because they were like separated. So that was fine, but it was all from one point of view. So I saw this, and I saw that there were 5 books. 5 books, and I saw that this one was really thick. So I was like, okay, this is probably the last book in the series. This is going to have all the action. I found out the war with Hybern was happening, and I was like, okay, this is probably where it is going to end, and this is where things are going to be solved and happy, because it's the thickest book. And I got to the 3rd book. Then it ended, and the war with Hybern was over, and Rhysand was saved, and Feyre and Rhysand were living together. But things with Cassian and Nesta weren't established. Things with Elaine and Lucy and Azriel, that triangle, weren't established. There was still stuff happening with the Mortal Queen Vasa, or if that's how you pronounce it, who had that deal with the guy who lived at the lake where she was like turning into like a phoenix or something, you know, during the day. And you know, there were still, the Mortal Queens hadn't given their armies to help Hybern, so they were still kind of in play. So it felt like a little bit like this was supposed to be a trilogy, and then maybe she got to the end and realized that she couldn't, or maybe she planned this to be, you know, a really long series after all, but planned to write it from different points of view. I think it just got a little confusing because I know with Throne of Glass it felt like it was very planned out, and then eventually she was writing it from all these different characters' point of view, so it didn't feel like anything was left open-ended because she could explain things from every single character's point of view and have these romances and like establish them because she had a multiple POV book. So then she had this, and then maybe she realized she needed to have more points of views in order to like really solve the conflict and establish these connections and character relationships and romances. I'm not really sure. So then I got really confused when I got to this book, and obviously it was a little sketchy that it was like this thin. I was like, I don't really know what this is about. I was honestly thinking that maybe this would talk about Lucien and how he went off and found the some mortal armies to fight with Hybern, because I know in the Throne of Glass series one of the books follows Kayal when he goes to find more armies, and it's actually like pretty thick, like more like this, just because that plays an important role in them actually in Throne of Glass. So then I don't know, I was a little confused, though. When I went to the bookstore, one of the women actually told me that this book like wasn't even necessary, but I actually do think it's important because I like how then in this book she does do multiple POV, because she does Feyre, Rhysand, Cassian, and more, and kind of just talks about how they are surviving and living after the war. So I actually think that's really important, because if she wanted to move on, she needed to establish how they were feeling following the war so she could write something like this. But I feel like I was still left confused. And then we have this one, and I really liked how it was from Nesta and Cassian's point of view and switched off because she could establish their relationship and their romance. But then again, still ending this book, there are still things on the rise. There are still things that really weren't established, which is why I think there's going to be more books. But I just feel like it got a little confusing because I was expecting something different and then got something else, which I'm not entirely unhappy with. It was just a little confusing because maybe then she was like, oh, I need to make it multiple POV. I really don't know. So that's like one thing. Okay, so that was my entire description of all this, and now I'm just going to give a little bit of a non-spoiler rundown yet again. Should you read this series? Should you not? So again, if you enjoy both romance and plot, kind of more equal parts instead of more plot and like 2/3 plot, 1/3 romance, I feel like this was more equal than like Throne of Glass or something, then I think you should definitely read it. Though I would just be aware that since this is an adult book, it does contain like more curse words and language, and as well as more times when I had to flip the page to kind of go over some more detailed romantic scenes, if you know what I'm talking about. So I would just be aware of that if you're wanting to read that, or if you're just starting with Sarah J. Maas, I would definitely start with Throne of Glass, which is her young adult series, because there's a lot less of that, but you still get all this wonderful plot, wonderful characters, wonderful romance. Yeah, I think that's it. Oh, I also did want to mention, if you guys haven't found out from Sarah J. Maas's Instagram, that this series is becoming a TV show, and that is what she is working on right now. She's like super busy with writing, I'm pretty sure, because she's trying to write the second book in the Crescent City series, as well as the pilot for this series that is coming a TV show. So I think that is super exciting, and I would definitely be watching that. There might be videos on it. I'm not sure when it's going to come out because there hasn't even been like a trailer or anything, because they're still writing the pilot, but I still think it's like super exciting that that is something that is happening. Is there anything else I need to mention? So yeah, I think that is all for this video, and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it wasn't too long by the time that I edit this down. And please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell because I will be doing a lot more videos in the future. Please feel free to let me know any other series that you want reviews on or that you want me to read. And if you like these reviews in this style compared to how I did it in my Twilight series review, which also make sure to check that out. And my last video was a Barnes & Noble haul, which I think was kind of fun because I was at the beach and doing some beach reading. So just a little self-promo there. So yeah, I think that is it. And I will see you guys in the next chapter. Bye!